Sarah Jenkins sighed as she walked through the busy hallways of Atlanta Memorial Hospital, her white nurse's shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor. It was just another Tuesday morning in September, or at least that's what she thought. At 32 years old, she had grown accustomed to her routine. Wake up, go to work, care for patients, go home, repeat. But fate had other plans for her that day. "Nurse Jenkins, we need you in room 415, called out Linda, the head nurse, her voice echoing through the corridor. New patient just got transferred from physical therapy. Sarah nodded, adjusting her navy blue scrubs as she made her way to the fourth floor. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and she pulled out her tablet to review the patient's information. Marcus Thompson, age 34, admitted for routine checkup following physical therapy sessions. The notes mentioned he had been in a construction accident 2 years ago. As she approached room 415, Sarah heard laughter, deep, genuine laughter that made her pause outside the door. It wasn't the kind of sound you usually heard in a hospital room. She knocked gently and pushed the door open. That's when she first saw him. Marcus Thompson sat in his wheelchair by the window, sunlight streaming in behind him, creating a warm glow around his broad shoulders. He was still chuckling at something the physical therapist had said. His smile was bright against his light brown skin, and his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, trying to maintain her professional composure. "I'm Nurse Jenkins, and I'll be taking care of you today." Marcus turned his wheelchair to face her, and his smile grew even wider. "Please call me Marcus," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "Mr. Thompson makes me sound like my father." The physical therapist excused herself, leaving them alone in the room. As Sarah began checking Marcus's vital signs, she couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed, despite being confined to a wheelchair. Most patients she encountered who had suffered life-altering accidents carried a heaviness about them, but not Marcus. "You must be wondering why I'm so cheerful in this place," Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. "Well, life's too short to be miserable, don't you think, Nurse Jenkins?" "Sarah," she found herself saying. "You can call me Sarah." As she worked, Marcus told her about the construction accident that had changed his life. He had been supervising a project when a support beam gave way. The doctors had told him he might never walk again, but instead of letting it defeat him, he chose to focus on what he could still do rather than what he couldn't. "I still have my mind, my heart, and my terrible sense of humor," he joked, making Sarah laugh despite herself. She learned that he now worked as a consultant for construction companies, helping them improve their safety protocols. His eyes lit up when he talked about preventing accidents like his from happening to others. The routine checkup should have taken 15 minutes, but somehow 30 minutes had passed. Sarah found herself sharing stories about her own life. Her move from Chicago to Atlanta 5 years ago, her love for cooking, and her dream of opening a small cafe someday. A nurse who wants to be a chef. Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That's quite a combination." "Well, both involve taking care of people, just in different ways," Sarah replied, surprised by how comfortable she felt talking to him. As she prepared to leave the room, Marcus called out, "Sarah." She turned back. "Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked you where you get your coffee around here? The hospital cafe isn't exactly known for its great brew." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She knew she shouldn't get personally involved with patients, but something about Marcus felt different. "There's a nice little place called Morning Glory just across the street," she said finally. "They make the best caramel lattes in Atlanta." "Maybe I'll see you there sometime," Marcus said with that warm smile that seemed to brighten the whole room. "My therapy sessions are every Tuesday and Thursday." As Sarah left room 415, she couldn't stop a small smile from spreading across her face. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to her Tuesday morning shifts, even though she tried to convince herself it was just because she enjoyed good conversation. Little did she know, this chance meeting would change her life forever. 2 weeks passed before Sarah and Marcus had their first real conversation outside the hospital. It happened on a sunny Thursday afternoon at Morning Glory Cafe, where Sarah was grabbing her usual coffee after her shift. She spotted him sitting by the window, his wheelchair positioned perfectly to catch the warm sunlight. "I was hoping I'd run into you here," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up as she walked past. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Would you like to join me?" Sarah glanced at her watch, knowing she should head home, but something made her pull out the chair and sit down. I suppose one coffee wouldn't hurt, she said, smiling. As they talked, Sarah's family's voices echoed in her head. Just last Sunday at dinner, her mother had given her the usual lecture about finding a good man and settling down. Her sister Lisa had chimed in. "You're not getting any younger, Sarah." None of them would have imagined her sitting here, sharing coffee with a disabled man, let alone feeling butterflies in her stomach when he smiled. "My mama always says I talk too much," Marcus said, breaking into her thoughts. "But I notice you haven't touched your coffee, so either I'm entertaining you, or I'm boring you to death." Sarah laughed, realizing her coffee had gone cold. "Definitely entertaining," she assured him. The way he talked about life, with such optimism and humor despite his challenges, fascinated her. Their coffee date turned into dinner the following week. Marcus chose a small Italian restaurant, calling ahead to ensure it was wheelchair accessible. When Sarah arrived, she found him already there, dressed in a crisp blue shirt that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely, making Sarah glad her dark skin hid her blush. During dinner, Marcus opened up about the accident. "The hardest part wasn't the physical pain," he admitted, pushing his pasta around his plate. "It was the way people started looking at me differently, like I wasn't the same person anymore." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Their loss," she said firmly, "because the person I see is pretty amazing." But not everyone shared Sarah's view. When she told her best friend Tanya about Marcus, the response was less than supportive. "Girl, are you crazy?" Tanya exclaimed over the phone. "You're young, successful, and gorgeous. You could have any man you want. Why would you choose someone who—" She paused, not finishing the sentence. "Someone who what?" Sarah challenged, feeling her anger rise. "Someone who's kind, intelligent, and makes me laugh? Someone who sees me for who I am, not just what I look like." Her family's reaction wasn't much better. Her mother pulled her aside after church one Sunday, concern written all over her face. "Baby, I just want you to think about your future. Marriage is hard enough without extra challenges." Sarah stood in her mother's kitchen, frustrated tears threatening to fall. "Mama, when you and Daddy got married, people said the same kind of things because you were darker than him. They talked about challenges too. Was their opinion more important than your love?" Her mother fell silent, remembering her own struggles. Through it all, Marcus proved them wrong with his actions. He never let his disability stop him from showing Sarah he cared. He surprised her with flowers delivered to the hospital. He remembered every little detail she shared about her life. When she mentioned missing her grandmother's sweet potato pie, he spent weeks perfecting the recipe, even though using the kitchen from his wheelchair wasn't easy. One evening, as they sat in the park watching the sunset, Marcus turned to Sarah with serious eyes. "You know, people probably think you're crazy for being with me." Sarah shook her head, taking his hand. "People thought Einstein was crazy too. Didn't stop him from being right." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the park. "Did you just compare our relationship to Einstein's theory of relativity?" "Maybe," Sarah grinned. "All I know is, when I'm with you, everything else makes more sense." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah realized something important. Love wasn't about what a person couldn't do. It was about who they chose to be despite their challenges. And Marcus, with his wheelchair and his wonderful heart, was choosing to be extraordinary. The seasons changed, and Sarah and Marcus's relationship grew stronger with each passing month. Their love story unfolded in small moments: shared lunches in the hospital cafeteria, evening phone calls that lasted until midnight, and weekend outings that always brought new adventures. One particular Saturday morning, Marcus suggested they visit the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. Sarah watched with admiration as he expertly maneuvered his wheelchair through the paths between the flowers. What caught her attention most wasn't his disability, but the way he stopped to explain the names and meanings of different plants to passing children who stared curiously at his wheelchair. "My grandfather was a gardener," he told her later, as they rested in the shade of a large oak tree. "He taught me that beauty comes in all forms, just like these flowers. Some are tall, some are short, some need support to grow, but they're all perfect in their own way." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. But their peaceful moment was interrupted by a group of passersby who whispered and pointed, not even trying to hide their judgment of the interracial couple, one of whom was in a wheelchair. Marcus noticed Sarah's shoulders tense. "Hey," he said softly, taking her hand. "Their words can't touch what we have." That evening, Sarah invited Marcus to her apartment for dinner for the first time. She had spent hours making sure everything was accessible for his wheelchair, moving furniture and creating clear paths. As she cooked his favorite meal, honey-glazed chicken with roasted vegetables, she couldn't help but smile at how natural it felt to adapt her space for him. "Something smells amazing," Marcus said as he rolled into her kitchen. He watched her cook, sharing stories about his own failed attempts at cooking from his wheelchair. "Did I tell you about the time I almost set off the smoke alarm trying to make toast?" Their laughter was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find her sister Lisa standing there, looking surprised to see Marcus. "Oh, I didn't know you had company," Lisa said, her eyes darting between Sarah and Marcus. The awkward silence that followed spoke volumes. But Marcus, ever the gentleman, broke the tension. "You must be Lisa. Sarah's told me so much about you. Did you know your sister has been trying to recreate your famous mac and cheese recipe?" Lisa's surprise slowly melted into a genuine smile as Marcus asked her questions about her job as a teacher and shared stories about his own sister, who also taught elementary school. By the time she left 2 hours later, she hugged Sarah and whispered, "I get it now. He's special." That night, after Marcus had gone home, Sarah lay in bed thinking about how he had won over her sister just like he'd been winning over everyone else in her life, with his genuine warmth and charm. Even her mother had started asking about him more often, especially after he sent her a birthday card with a heartfelt note. But their relationship faced its biggest test when Marcus got sick with a severe case of pneumonia. Sarah found herself on the other side of the hospital bed, watching as doctors treated the man she now knew she couldn't live without. "You don't have to stay," Marcus said weakly, seeing her exhausted face after she had spent another night in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. Sarah took his hand firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. Remember what you told me about those flowers in the garden? Some need support to grow, but that doesn't make them any less beautiful." Marcus squeezed her hand, tears in his eyes. "I love you," he said for the first time. "I've been afraid to say it because, well, look at me. I can't give you the life you deserve." Sarah leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "You've given me something better, a love that doesn't care what other people think, that doesn't see limitations, only possibilities." As Marcus recovered over the next few weeks, their bond grew even stronger. Sarah realized that true love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about finding someone who made you want to be a better person, someone who saw past the surface to who you really were. Little did she know, Marcus had already started planning something that would change both their lives forever. Spring arrived in Atlanta, bringing with it warm breezes and blooming dogwood trees. Marcus had been acting strange for weeks, making mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when Sarah entered the room and having hushed conversations with his physical therapist that stopped when she came near. Sarah tried not to worry, but doubt crept into her mind. Was he having second thoughts about their relationship? Had the pressure from society finally become too much? She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on their upcoming one-year anniversary of their first coffee shop meeting. On a quiet Saturday morning, Marcus called Sarah with an unusual request. "Can you meet me at the park where we had our first outdoor date, around sunset?" "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, noting the nervous tremor in his voice. "Everything's perfect," he assured her. "Just meet me there at 6. Sarah spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing a yellow sundress that Marcus once said reminded him of sunshine. When she arrived at the park, her heart nearly stopped. The path to their favorite spot was lined with twinkling lights, and flower petals were scattered on the ground. Marcus waited for her by the old oak tree, looking handsome in a dark blue suit. His wheelchair had been decorated with small white flowers, and his smile was brighter than all the lights combined. "Sarah," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "this past year has been the most amazing time of my life. When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. I thought no one could ever love someone who was broken." "Marcus," Sarah started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish, please," he said softly. Then you walked into my hospital room, and suddenly being in a wheelchair didn't feel like the end of my story. It felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful. To Sarah's complete surprise, Marcus pressed a button on his wheelchair, activating a mechanical feature she'd never seen before. The chair slowly raised him into a standing position, supported by sturdy braces. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she watched him, now at eye level with her, reach into his jacket pocket with trembling hands. My physical therapist helped me practice this for weeks, he admitted, pulling out a small velvet box, because I wanted to do this properly. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as Marcus carefully balanced himself and opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring. Sarah Jenkins, you saw past my wheelchair to the man inside. You fought for our love when others doubted it. You showed me that limitations only exist if we let them. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. Sarah could hear some people sniffling and others whispering encouraging words. I may not be able to get down on one knee, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, but I can promise to love you with every fiber of my being for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Sarah's tears flowed freely as she stepped closer to him. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, the small crowd burst into applause. Sarah noticed then that among them were familiar faces, her mother, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her sister Lisa, recording everything on her phone, and Marcus's family, all wearing huge smiles. You planned all this? Sarah asked in amazement. Marcus grinned. With a lot of help. Your mom picked out the flowers, Lisa helped with the lights, and my physical therapist spent weeks helping me get strong enough to stand. I wanted to show you and everyone else that love helps us overcome any obstacle. Sarah wrapped her arms around him carefully, mindful of his balance. I would have said yes if you had proposed to me in the hospital cafeteria, she whispered. But this is magical. As their family surrounded them with hugs and congratulations, Marcus whispered in Sarah's ear, This is just the beginning of our story, future Mrs. Thompson. I have one more surprise waiting for you, but that will have to wait for our wedding day. Sarah looked at him curiously, but Marcus just smiled mysteriously. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Sarah realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that don't follow the usual path. The morning of Sarah and Marcus's wedding dawned bright and clear. The small church on the outskirts of Atlanta buzzed with activity as both families came together to prepare for the celebration. White and purple flowers decorated every pew, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the floor. In the bridal room, Sarah sat in front of a vintage mirror while her mother carefully adjusted her veil. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that seemed to float when she moved. Baby girl, her mother said, meeting Sarah's eyes in the mirror, I need to apologize for how I acted when you first told me about Marcus. I was wrong. That man loves you more than any mother could hope for her daughter. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand, remembering how things had changed after the proposal. Her mother had thrown herself into the wedding planning, making sure everything would be perfect for their special day. She had even insisted on having the ramps at the church redone to make them smoother for Marcus's wheelchair. Meanwhile, in another room, Marcus was getting ready with help from his brother James. His new suit had been specially tailored to look perfect whether he was sitting or standing, and his shoes were polished until they shone. Nervous? James asked, adjusting Marcus's bow tie. Only about keeping one particular secret. Marcus replied with a mysterious smile. He patted the pocket where he kept a small note, something he planned to give Sarah during the reception. The ceremony was scheduled for noon, but at 11:30, dark clouds suddenly rolled in. The wedding planner rushed around, panicking about the weather, but Sarah remained calm. Rain on your wedding day means good luck, Marcus's grandmother told her with a knowing smile. And baby, from what I can see, you and Marcus have more than enough love to weather any storm. As if by miracle, just before the ceremony began, the clouds parted and a rainbow appeared in the sky. The guests took it as a sign, murmuring happily among themselves as they found their seats. The music started, and Sarah's father appeared at the door of the bridal room. Ready, princess? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw only Marcus, waiting for her at the altar. His wheelchair had been decorated with the same white and purple flowers that adorned the church, and his smile was brighter than any rainbow. The pastor began the ceremony with words about love knowing no boundaries. He spoke about how true love sees with the heart, not with the eyes, and how it lifts us above our physical limitations to touch our very souls. When it came time for the vows, Marcus surprised everyone by pressing the button on his wheelchair that helped him stand. With the help of his newly improved braces, he stood tall as he spoke his promises to Sarah. "Sarah Jenkins," he began, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love you not just for what you see in me, but for helping me see more in myself. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face every challenge by your side, and to remind you every day why you chose me." Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke her vows. "Marcus Thompson, you showed me that love isn't about what a person can or cannot do. It's about who they choose to be. I promise to choose you, every single day, to be your strength when you need it, and to let you be mine." The exchange of rings was followed by their first kiss as husband and wife, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. As they turned to face their guests, Sarah noticed something unusual. Marcus's family members were exchanging knowing looks, and his physical therapist, sitting in the front row, gave him a subtle thumbs up. "What are you planning?" Sarah whispered as they made their way down the aisle. Marcus squeezed her hand. "You'll see, Mrs. Thompson, but first, we have a reception to enjoy." As they left the church, rice and flower petals showering down on them, neither Sarah nor Marcus could stop smiling. But while Sarah was simply happy to be married to the man she loved, Marcus knew that the biggest surprise of all was still to come. The wedding reception was held in a beautifully decorated barn venue just outside the city. Fairy lights twinkled from the wooden beams overhead, and round tables dotted the space, each centered with purple and white flower arrangements. The wheelchair-accessible dance floor sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Sarah noticed something odd throughout the evening. Every time she looked at Marcus's family members, they seemed to be sharing secret smiles. His mother kept wiping tears from her eyes even when nothing particularly emotional was happening, and his physical therapist, Dr. Roberts, had stayed for the reception, something unusual for a medical professional. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked Marcus's sister Rachel while helping her get punch. "Everyone seems to be acting strange." Rachel quickly composed her face. "Just happy tears, that's all. It's not every day my brother gets married to such an amazing woman." The evening progressed with all the traditional wedding activities. They cut the cake together, with Marcus joking about how he practiced holding the knife steady for weeks. Their first dance was a slow, sweet sway to At Last by Etta James, with Sarah sitting on Marcus's lap in his wheelchair, her head resting on his shoulder as they moved in gentle circles. During dinner, Marcus's best man James stood up for his speech. His words started normally enough, talking about growing up with Marcus and their childhood adventures, but then his voice grew serious. When Marcus had his accident, James said, "We all worried about him." But then Sarah came into his life, and suddenly Marcus wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. She inspired him to push harder in his therapy, to dream bigger, too. James stopped abruptly, looking at Marcus with wide eyes. Marcus quickly coughed loudly, giving his brother a meaningful look. James fumbled for a moment before raising his glass. To the happy couple. Sarah's suspicions grew stronger. She watched as Marcus had several hushed conversations with his physical therapist, who kept checking his phone and nodding. Even the wedding photographer seemed to be in on whatever was happening, constantly checking the time and whispering with Marcus's family. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the barn's windows, Marcus's mother approached the newlyweds' table. Her eyes were glistening with tears again. "Marcus, honey," she said softly, "it's almost time." Marcus nodded, then turned to Sarah with a gentle smile. "Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you." But before he could continue, the wedding planner interrupted, announcing it was time for the bouquet toss. Sarah was whisked away by her bridesmaids, leaving Marcus looking both relieved and nervous. When Sarah returned, she found Marcus deep in conversation with Dr. Roberts, who was showing him something on a tablet. They quickly stopped talking when they saw her. "What's going on?" Sarah finally asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Marcus took her hand. "Do you trust me?" "Of course I do." Then just be patient for a little while longer, he said, kissing her knuckles. Everything will make sense soon. As the evening wore on, Sarah noticed more unusual things. Marcus's father kept checking his watch and nodding to his son. The physical therapist had brought in a large bag that he kept close by. Even the DJ seemed to be waiting for some kind of signal, constantly glancing at Marcus for direction. Finally, as the reception was winding down, Marcus's mother stood up and clinked her glass. The room fell silent. "Before we send these beautiful newlyweds off," she announced, her voice quivering with emotion, "Marcus has something special planned. But first, we need everyone to head outside to the garden area." The guests began moving outside, murmuring excitedly among themselves. Sarah started to follow, but Marcus caught her hand. "Wait," he said softly. "I need to get ready. James will escort you out." "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, completely confused. Marcus just smiled that mysterious smile he'd been wearing all day. "For the biggest surprise of your life, Mrs. Thompson. For something I've been working toward for months, just for this moment." As James led her outside, Sarah's heart raced with anticipation. Whatever Marcus had planned, it was clear that everyone else knew about it. She stood among their guests in the garden, watching the door of the barn, waiting for her husband to appear and finally reveal his secret. The garden outside the barn was lit with hundreds of twinkling lights, and the evening air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine. Sarah stood among the wedding guests, her heart pounding as she waited. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, cameras ready, all eyes fixed on the barn doors. Dr. Roberts emerged first, carrying his mysterious medical bag. He quickly set up some equipment off to the side, then nodded to someone inside the barn. The wedding DJ started playing soft instrumental music, and Marcus's father stepped outside, tears already streaming down his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for the past 8 months, while you were planning this wedding, my son was planning something else too. Something amazing." The barn doors opened fully, and Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. There stood Marcus, not in his wheelchair, but standing upright between 2 parallel bars that had been secretly set up. He was wearing a special set of advanced leg braces, different from the ones he'd used during the proposal. Dr. Roberts stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. "Hi, beautiful," Marcus called out, his voice slightly strained from concentration. Then, gripping the parallel bars firmly, he began to move. The crowd gasped collectively as Marcus took his first step forward. Sarah felt her knees go weak, and her sister quickly moved to support her. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her husband, the man everyone said would never walk again, taking slow but determined steps toward her. "I've been doing secret therapy sessions," Marcus explained as he moved, each step careful but purposeful. "Double sessions, sometimes triple. Every time you thought I was at a business meeting these past months, I was actually working with Dr. Roberts." Step by step, he made his way down the short path they had created. His face showed intense concentration, but his eyes never left Sarah's. 20 feet had never seemed so far, yet he kept moving forward. "The doctors said I might never walk again," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each step. "But they didn't count on having someone like you to walk toward." The wedding guests were silent except for quiet sniffles and the occasional whispered, "Oh my God." Phones and cameras recorded the moment, capturing every precious step. "Remember when I got sick with pneumonia?" Marcus asked, pausing briefly to catch his breath. "That wasn't just pneumonia. I had my first surgery then, to prepare for these braces. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I wanted this moment to be perfect." Sarah couldn't speak through her tears. She watched as her husband, the man who had captured her heart from a wheelchair, continued his journey toward her. His steps were slow but steady, each one a testament to months of secret hard work and determination. Finally, after what seemed like both an eternity and just a moment, Marcus reached the end of the parallel bars. Dr. Roberts quickly moved forward with a walker, but Marcus shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. Then, with trembling legs but a determined spirit, Marcus took 2 steps without support, closing the final distance between himself and Sarah. Standing face to face with his bride, Marcus reached up and wiped away her tears. "Surprise," he whispered, managing a tired smile. "I wanted to walk out of our wedding with you." Sarah threw her arms around him carefully, mindful of his balance. "How? was all she could manage to say. New medical technology, endless physical therapy, and most importantly, love, Marcus replied, holding her close. Every time I felt like giving up, I thought about this moment, about walking beside you as your husband. The garden erupted in applause and cheers. Even Dr. Roberts was wiping tears from his eyes as he watched his patient achieve what many had thought impossible. Marcus's mother stepped forward with his wheelchair. "You'll need this for a while still," she said gently. "Rome wasn't built in a day." As Marcus carefully sat back down, Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair. "You amazing, wonderful, sneaky man," she said, laughing through her tears. "I fell in love with you without ever seeing you take a step. This is just a bonus?" Marcus suggested, pulling her close for a kiss. "No," Sarah replied softly. "This is a miracle. Our miracle." But what none of them knew was that Marcus had one final surprise waiting, one that would make their journey home from the wedding even more unforgettable. As the reception came to an end, Sarah and Marcus prepared to leave for their honeymoon. The guests lined up outside the barn with sparklers, creating a magical pathway to their decorated car. But instead of heading toward the vehicle, Marcus gestured for their driver to turn in a different direction. "I have one last surprise," Marcus said, taking Sarah's hand. "Do you remember how I always talked about building a dream house someday?" Sarah nodded, recalling their many conversations about their future home. Marcus had always been passionate about architecture, even after his accident. "Well," he continued, "those extra therapy sessions weren't the only secret I've been keeping." He handed their driver a piece of paper with directions. "Take us home, James." They drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the busy city behind. The road curved through peaceful countryside, with the moon casting a silver glow over the fields. Finally, they turned onto a private lane lined with young oak trees. "Marcus, where are we?" Sarah asked, her heart racing with anticipation. The car stopped in front of a beautiful piece of land overlooking a small lake. There, bathed in strategically placed spotlights, stood a partially constructed house. A large banner hung across the front. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." "This is ours," Marcus said softly. "I've been working with an architect who specializes in accessible home design. The whole house is being built to be wheelchair-friendly, but also adaptable as I continue my therapy." Sarah stepped out of the car in amazement. The foundation was complete, and the frame of the house stood proud against the night sky. She could see the beginnings of large windows, a wraparound porch, and gentle slopes instead of stairs. "Remember all those late-night phone calls I said were work-related?" Marcus wheeled himself onto the smooth concrete pathway. "I was actually talking to contractors. Your father helped me pick out the land. He said it reminded him of where he grew up." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as Marcus continued the tour. "The kitchen will have adjustable height counters, so we can cook together whether I'm in my chair or using my braces. The master bathroom will have both regular and roll-in showers. And this," he pointed to a large space near the back, "this will be your cafe." "My cafe?" Sarah gasped. "A commercial-grade kitchen where you can practice your recipes and maybe even start that catering business you've always dreamed about. Because you believed in my dreams, so I wanted to help make yours come true too." Sarah walked around in awe, listening as Marcus described each room, each specially designed feature. He had thought of everything: wide doorways, smooth transitions between rooms, and a therapy room where he could continue his exercises. "The best part," Marcus said, leading her to the back of the property, "is this view." They stopped at the edge of a small hill overlooking the lake, where the moonlight danced on the water's surface. "Our children can play here someday, and we can watch the sunset together every evening." Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, overwhelmed with emotion. "You did all this while planning your surprise walk?" Marcus nodded. "I wanted to show you that our life together won't be about limitations. It's going to be about possibilities. Whether I'm in this chair or walking with braces, this home will be perfect for us. Just like you're perfect for me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a key attached to a heart-shaped keychain. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson." Sarah took the key with trembling hands. "You know what this means, right?" she said, wiping away happy tears. "What's that?" It means that when you're ready to try walking again, you'll have the perfect place to practice. Our home. Marcus pulled her close for a kiss. I love how you think, wife of mine. As they sat there together, watching the moonlight on the lake, Sarah realized that their love story wasn't just about overcoming disabilities or proving others wrong. It was about two people who saw the best in each other, who refused to let anything stand in the way of their dreams. Ready to start our new life? Marcus asked, squeezing her hand. Sarah smiled, clutching the key to their future. With you? Always. And there, under the stars, on their own piece of land, Sarah and Marcus began the next chapter of their extraordinary love story. A story that proved that with enough love, determination, and faith, any obstacle could be overcome and any dream could come true. The end.